you have this threat piece, this unknown potential enemy in the sky. Is it of Earth or is it not of Earth, right? So, that's being dangled out there. And then you've got people that are, filling in gaps with that. Or maybe some people didn't even see it, because sometimes, it's not on other people's radar, unless they're watching the news and they're picking it up. So you have this, you have this schism, right? You have the people in the UFO community who, and I would say this too, have been so starved of getting any truth whatsoever, that then when something like this does come out or does happen, there's a rush for, oh, is this disclosure now? Are they finally going to tell us the truth? And, how do we even know that they entirely have all the truth?
Right now on Higher Journeys with Alexis Brooks. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Higher Journeys. I am your host, Alexis Brooks. And as I always say, if it is your first time here, I welcome you. I welcome you into a discussion that I always look forward to having with the likes of Susan Manewich, our third time, Susan, you've been on the show. Really happy about that. And each and every time Susan joins us, she leaves us with more questions, but in a good way, because we dive deep into this thing we call the ET contact, UFO, and now air quotes disclosure phenomenon, question mark. Now, before we get started, I want to say this for the record. We are recording this in July. I believe it is July 11th to be exact. This will not air until August. So I'm going to say as a disclaimer, God only knows what will happen between now and mid-August, probably, when you're seeing this. So we're going to make this as evergreen a conversation as we can, Susan. But we're going to talk about what's on the table right now. What's on the table right now, I will tell you, and in the archives, are a part of Susan's amazing Substack that she is just on top of constantly. Thank goodness for Substack, Susan, and the fact that we can be as transparent and as forthcoming as we need to be so far. And this is a case with Susan's two latest articles as of today. I'm going to name them. The latest one is The Experimental Industrial Complex, Attempting to Control Consciousness in the Age of Disclosure. The second one, the one that was published, I believe, just previous to that, is a question. What are UFO disclosure gatekeepers acclimating the public to? This will be the basis for the discussion we're having, I should say. She goes into some deep stuff. Susan, I really commend you for your courage, first and foremost, your attention to intricate detail in terms of going deep and asking courageous questions. So I want to just start with the most recent. And guys, I'm gonna link obviously both of these articles. In fact, one of them you gave me permission to put on Higher Journeys, but it will lead you back to her Substack because you need to go there. Where do you want to start? Do you want to start with experimental industrial complex? That's an eye-catching title there, and where you're going with that. Let me set the stage. You're talking about the missing element, the missing elephant in the room, the good elephant in this discussion, having to do with human decency and altruism and with honest transparency in terms of this alleged disclosure that's still ongoing, glaring omissions. Why is that?
Well, I thought about that a lot. You think about your place in this, right? And it's not something that you say to yourself, oh, I want to not accept this, which is now like the dominant narrative of disclosure, because, someone like myself who's had contact pretty much my entire life, and incarnated in with my consciousness, you want the truth to come out. And when something doesn't feel like it's truthful, or it feels like it's a distortion of the truth, and then you because of your life experiences and because of maybe how you see the world, you say, geez, is this it? And why doesn't this feel the way that maybe you think truth is supposed to feel within your body and your being. And so I think that some of us that are here, in these bodies, performing these roles and functions, I think it's our job. It feels like it's my job to question this, because I respect people within the UFO community. I would say I'm not a deep part of it, never really have been, and maybe we can talk about that too. But also seem to be someone who's in a bit of an observation position, that just feels like we have to ask some integral questions, because it's not just about ET disclosure, or UFOs or technology, that I have a history and worked in, which is important as it relates to this whole thing. It's really about the human family and how we actually deal and treat with one another on this. And we cannot ignore what has happened historically in the past as it relates to our government, the United States government. We cannot ignore that. If we do that in this disclosure process, we are seriously missing something huge. And I see that. And we also cannot ignore the present, the recent present of these last couple of years, but also, where we stand today. So I ask these questions because this is something that we all deserve to ask. And if we are not asking it, then I don't think that we're really evolving here as we think we are.
What you're alluding to, what she's alluding to, everyone, is the fact or the question: should the government be trusted given their history? And in this article that we're speaking of right now, she goes very, very deep into why we need to question the efficacy of our government and our intelligence agencies. And so what we're really dancing around, and not really dancing around, Susan, is the fact that ever since this, let's call it the Grusch, I'm going to stop saying bombshell, the Grusch revelation, the story of David Grusch and how he came forward with these crashed craft retrievals et al. There have been questions among some of us, and I tend to agree, that what is the intent here? Now, in the article previous to this, you go into that very, very well. What is the motivation of all that's happening here? And are we looking at a very narrow band of a narrative in lockstep? And in the second article, the one that we're speaking of now, you go into why we really need to be questioning that, given the marred history, to say the least. We're going to talk about some of the things that are now declassified, including the MK Ultra. As a matter of fact, we're going to take that part of the conversation over to Patreon for, I think, obvious reasons. We're going to take it to the after show. We'll go a little bit deeper into that, Susan. But there's a schism between communities, even within the ufology community, a schism that has to do with those that, rightly so, focus on the research having to do with reverse technology, crash craft retrievals, whistleblowers, lights in the sky, versus those like yourself and like many in our audience who are having interpersonal experiences, ongoing, lifelong, with these so-called non-human intelligences. How do you feel, how do you think people that are the experiencers who heard this news over the last month or two of final revelation to some degree are processing this?
Well,
Angry?
I'll tell you how some of them are processing it. And I don't speak for everybody, obviously, but people that I've known for ages, years, 20 years, maybe 15 minimum, that are contactees that are not, they're not on the speaking circuit. They don't write books. Maybe they've given an interview once in a while, but it's something that, that it is an enormous part of their life, but it's not something that they are making money from, or that's their livelihood, and there's many of those different people. And um, not too happy, I would say. That's what has come back to me, and that's what I've seen, in a deep mistrust as well for what they're now seeing, and that's important to take into consideration. So, while you have some people that are enthusiastic about this, that are in the UFO community, you have others that have never really been in the UFO community that don't have that level of enthusiasm. And I'm one of them. But the irony is, so aren't some of my other friends, and they're friends, they're not colleagues, they're friends, people that I care about, trust, respect, and that they live their life, and they live it very, very humble, and they live it with a knowing of their connection that they have to, whether they call it their star family or the beings. That's something that's a sacred connection for them.
Okay. You brought up the excellent volume Beyond UFOs, of which you were featured in by the then organization called Free. It's now been renamed. And again, this sort of opposition in terms of what the beings, I'll put that in quotes as well, represent, benevolence or malevolent. I happen to think it's a spectrum. But let's address that, particularly as it relates to the news that's coming out, and the focus, the emphasis on national security, not only national security, but the threat that seems to be inclusive of this narrative that this could potentially represent, the threat of them, juxtaposing that with what's been said in these extensive studies done by the likes of Free. That paint a very different picture, and taking it back to how these experiencers that may feel that way, that they're dealing with benevolent star beings, particularly in the face of this very different narrative. Yeah. Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's that kind of black and white, in the sense of doing research for Free. The Free study, what we found is that basically 80% of people's contact experiences, they felt were quote unquote good, right? Like there was some type of benevolence that led them to some type of extraordinary reveal or knowledge or skill, ability. So there was something that they felt was very positive about it in some capacity. So, and that seems to be, I would say, consistent within those people that have actually had contact, right? So, and then you seem to have these talking points that come out with, I'll just, do the air quotes of disclosure, or even any of the talks. So if you remember the spy balloon piece that came through, we really track that. And the we is my husband and I, he happens to be a journalist. So, we were really tracking it and trying to, some was really obvious, and some you had to really just look at the language, and, that they said the word UFO and threat, and, then, okay, people are looking up at the sky, and keep in mind, this is very soon after this lockdown happened, with, and I'll just focus on the United States, even though, in some places it was worldwide, right? Other countries were doing this too, not all, but most. So you have this threat piece, this unknown potential enemy in the sky. Is it of Earth or is it not of Earth, right? So, that's being dangled out there. And then you've got people that are, filling in gaps with that. Or maybe some people didn't even see it, because sometimes, it's not on other people's radar, unless they're watching the news and they're picking it up. So you have this, you have this schism, right? You have the people in the UFO community who, and I would say this too, have been so starved of getting any truth whatsoever, that then when something like this does come out or does happen, there's a rush for, is this disclosure now? Are they finally going to tell us the truth? And, how do we even know that they entirely have all the truth? That piece is important to take into
Absolutely.
consideration, right? So there's this dependency on some authority, going back to the reference to authority being able to, be the ones that share this truth with you. So, so there you go. There's a schism in that piece. And then I'll add another part to that, in that other article that you referenced, what are they potentially preparing us for, which I think came out in the second week of June. And I know Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, I wouldn't say that they're advocates, but I would say there's this kind of agreement to maybe move some of this information out. But even in that languaging that's being utilized, there's no softening, or it doesn't even seem like there's some neutrality as it relates to this. Like there's some type of narrative that appears to be in lockstep with one another on this, and even a progression of language from Lou Elizondo in 2017 to the progression of Grusch that I put in the article.
So you did.
Yeah,
you did. And you did that quite well. And, you did reference Leslie Kean, I believe, in the second article, where and by the way, she and Ralph both gave what I would say is a pretty good interview to Whitley Strieber shortly after the Grusch piece came forward, shortly after June 5th. But in that, they were having a conversation about, after Whitley asking, look, why is this, what is this all about? I mean, he was really asking the same question. I thought he gave a good interview. I think he did a good job. And she sort of said, well, this may be happening she didn't say on purpose, that it's happening with drips at a time, drips being brought out one aspect at a time in order to acclimatize people to ultimate reality. And I don't know what the whether there was anything deeper to that than that's just what she felt or not. I want to be careful here. I don't know Leslie Kean personally. I know that she's done some stellar work as a researcher, and I think she really believes in what she's writing, including the piece that she and Ralph did with the Grusch story. But that, to me, you brought that up in that context in the article, and I think that's a worthy thing to say. The way she put it, things are being brought out with a plan.
right.
Little pieces at a time to acclimate people. But the question is, to what? Acclimate people to what?
Exactly. Thank you. And the exact words were, I put it in the article, it's a matter of strategically bringing out aspects one step at a time and letting people acclimate to that. And, when you look at that and you say to yourself, wait a second, isn't that a gatekeeper and not a journalist? So, this is where you have to do a double check here, okay? And say, well, what faction or what group? Because there does seem to be this, what I would call, Elizondo kind of melon slash, maybe Leslie Kean, piece in there, and now with Grusch, right? And you just have to ask and say, so this is part of this release, but is this journalism? Is this, and then this got picked up by, News Nation.
News Nation, right.
And, News Nation is not, they may be newer, but they're part of a very, a multi-billion-dollar network.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And so when I hear, and bless other people in this community, when I hear them say, well, CNN didn't pick this up, it's like, but you've got Chris Cuomo, who's a former CNN guy, who is really, heading up News
Part
Nation.
Of that apparatus. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So, why are you looking at CNN, who's really had, some very terrible ratings over these last couple of years? From a strategic standpoint, why not put the story into a what looks like something, that's up and coming, or that looks like something that's more kind of ground level, because that's the way that journalism has been moving. It's been more ground level of people recording out of, their cars and on the street and things like that. So, there's some of that flavor that looks like you've got things that are actually mainstream media, because if it's multi-billion-dollar backed, that's mainstream media.
Oh, absolutely.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so like there's all these questions that you have to ask, because they're not computing. Now,
Yeah.
maybe they do compute. I've met Ralph Blumenthal. He actually interviewed me in, I think it was maybe 2009 or so. Came to my home and interviewed me. There's no, you're not criticizing as people, trying to understand the dynamics and what for me and others seems to be off, and that's what I'm
Mm.
sharing, and that's what I'm writing about. Because if I didn't have a history of contact, if I didn't have a history of the military kidnapping as a child, and didn't have the history of incarnating unconsciously, and didn't have the history of new energy technology, I may not have much to say. But because
Mm.
I have a background in these things, I'd prefer to be out gardening and not
That makes two of us.
and doing other things in my life than sitting here, um, trying to create accountability and awareness, because it seems to be lacking. But I guess that's the to do that some of us have, is
Yeah.
is to push and ask these questions. And there's so much more that we haven't talked about, because my concern is that the roots are attempting to be laid in public consciousness, and they are being laid in public consciousness. And if those roots are not truthful, if they're not clear, if they're not coherent, if they don't have, honestly, this altruism connected to it, and it's holistic and inclusive, then it's going to be very challenging and very difficult for people to make that discernment of what's real and not. And there are people that I know that don't know a lot about this field, but they've been seeing what's on the news. They've been seeing what's on some of these alternative, quote unquote, alternative channels. And they ask me, they say, Susan, what's true and what's not? So this is what we're talking about, and this is why it's important to get in the gate early on this, and hold that accountability and ask these questions before this freight train really starts to go massively down the tracks and then potentially off the rail. So that's
Right.
why it's important to ask.
If you're enjoying this episode, along with all of the subjects that we cover here on Higher Journeys, then I invite you to join our members-only community on Patreon, where we go even deeper into the conversations with the guests that you know and love. Not only does your membership ensure that we can keep this work going and growing, but you'll also get immediate access to our exclusive after shows. Get up close and personal with the guests of the show, along with many other member perks. So click on the link below to join now, or visit higherjourneys.com, where you'll find the Patreon link. We'll see you on the journey. Thanks. Well, I think as far as they're concerned, Susan, the train has left the station. As far as they being whomever these factions are that are putting the narrative, that are trying to reveal something probably for their own gain versus ours. Sorry. But here's a question that I think you and I have talked about before, and that has to do with, the fact that I think you use the term continuity of media, in rolling out the narratives using certain keywords. And yet let's just take the June 5th-ish time period, that being even a little bit before, with the NASA public hearing, the Greer press conference at the press club in DC,
Yeah.
all the
Yes.
way to Las Vegas, and that really, really bizarro
Right.
story, and Grusch, all of this happening around the same time. And yet I wouldn't call this a ubiquitous headline, meaning that there were a lot of people not a lot, but enough people that I talked to in main, in the mainstream, that watched the mainstream, that hadn't heard anything.
Right.
So here's my question, and this is where it gets a bit, what do I want to call it? It gets a little weird, a little wonky, because let's now talk about subliminal programming and the fact that not everyone necessarily needs to consciously process the headline in order for them to be affected at another level. So my question is, why wasn't this an even bigger headline? It's certainly, when you think about the bones of what they were implying, it should have been, but it wasn't. Are they thinking it didn't need to be in order to get done what they need to get done anyway? Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, sure. That's a great point that you bring up and that you make, and I think it's important for us to take that and look at what do we know, right? Um, what we know, and by the way, there's an article that came out that I just want to read the title of it, so it relates to what you're saying. It's from the Telegraph, and the title of it is "Britain Drilled to Accept Lockdown in Future Pandemics," says Nudge Unit Chief. So this professor by the name of David Halpern predicts the population would comply with another lockdown because they know what the drill is. So that's one professor, and I'm probably going to put that in a future article shortly. So there's a conditioning that's already been set in many human beings, and even though people, some people decided, hey, I'm not going to comply with this, I'm going to do things my own way, and it's going to be safe for me, it's going to be safe for my family, but I'm not going to do this because the potential harm is too catastrophic. So there may be some of that population, but there's this, everybody in the United States knows what COVID is, right? Or everybody knows what happened over these last couple of years. There's people that, unless you were completely off the grid and you weren't impacted, which was highly unlikely. I mean, maybe 0.05% of the population. So you have this already set in the psyche, freshly, and the behavioral and the neural pathways and everything like that. So maybe it's not going to take much to put people further into that. And, I have a 20-year background in emotional intelligence, and did research on that, taught that all around the world, worked with executives and leaders and organizations. And, when you really start to understand emotional, behaviors and neural pathways and all these things that get set, and also as it relates to people's values, you realize that, wow, it is rather difficult to adjust and shift human behavior. There's a lot that needs to be done to do that. So maybe it doesn't need to be so overt. Maybe it doesn't need to be so in your face, because maybe the deeper roots were set that if another threat-based narrative or threat, came into play, that people would know how to behave because it's more automatic from a response standpoint and maybe less cognitive.
Interesting. And interesting that you should not juxtapose, but just sort of draw a nexus between that thing that happened then and this thing that's happening now, and really the timing and the dissemination of that. But we'll leave that maybe for another time, another venue. Anyway, yeah,
No,
I think that makes sense, Susan. Again, we're really talking about, I've always said that assuming that there is a faction whose chief concern and chief mission is to maintain, to get and maintain control over the large population, they need to know one thing and one thing only, and that's human psychology. It's been said that some of the best psychologists are on speed dial with some of these agencies and others to do certain things at certain times, or to lend advice on how to do certain things at certain times. So we're talking about a playbook. And I'm going to agree with you there too, that maybe it does not need to be, wall-to-wall headlines about this UFO stuff that's going on right now in order to get the job done, because the template has been set for response. So when they get ready to pull the trigger, assuming that's what's happening here, I'm still going to say jury's out. I don't know what the impetus is truly,
right.
for a fact, what's
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Right. So sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was
This
going
is
to
more of
say,
a conversation.
yeah, I know, which is great. I love it this way. because there's, I know that there's people, and I'll just come out and say it. Greer, for example, say they're going to do a fake alien invasion, and do they have the technology to probably do that? Absolutely. And have they primed the public to do that? Sure. I mean, absolutely. Does that mean that that's what's going to happen? Not necessarily, because is that one possibility? Sure, it's possible. However, one of the other things that I'm seeing, if I can talk about, that would be helpful is, I've been seeing and watching what I call the pecking order. And I do believe that there is a relationship. We have this relationship with source, and this is based on my own experience, and also the research that I helped to publish with Free. There's this relationship with source. You have the creator beings, angels. You've got interdimensional beings, and now the term that I'm hearing is ultra dimensional beings. Oh, great! It's that sounds real exciting. I've never referred to the beings that I've been connected to as ultra dimensional, but hey, that's kind of cool. Because that is ultimately what they are. But the point is that, and I wrote about this in the last article, there was an interview with this woman. She's a University of North Carolina professor. Her name is Diana Pasulka. Seems like a lovely person. Wrote a book called American Cosmic, and she was in an interview with this gentleman, and she talked about a gentleman that came into her classroom to do like a guest lecturer, and only referred to him by his first name. Don't even know if that's his real name. I don't think it was. And he talked about this pecking order. Okay, yeah, that's again similar to what people who have had contact will say. There's this interrelationship. However, he then inserted the military, that the military is on par with these beings. Now that raises an enormous red flag, because one of the things that that I try to bring attention to and awareness around is, so many contactees have been followed, kidnapped, and followed, and have experiments that have been done to them. And you say to yourself, okay, so if the military is allegedly on par with these beings, then why are you going after people that you think are higher level with their abilities, right? I mean, there's numerous stories of people that have had this, other than myself. So why? And it looks to me what the military is doing is putting themselves on par with these quote unquote beings. Now, does it mean that they are on par with some of them? Maybe. Does it mean that they're on par with the higher level ones? Probably not. And I'm going to be so bold as to say that, because, higher level beings are not going to, I mean, if you, again, look at the research with Free, and even look at, all the great yogis of the world and the great spiritual leaders, you don't mess with human sovereignty. You don't mess with that. There's ethics, there's morals, there's the capacity to choose. There's a respect for your fellow man, woman, life, children, family. They're not going to go around kidnapping people. And they're not going to go around doing, nasty experiments like they did in MK Ultra, which didn't stop, by the way. I mean, even though that hearing happened in 1977, the stuff didn't stop. If anything, they just got a little bit more, a lot more sophisticated. And their technology got more sophisticated because of, it did. And again, I hope to write about that. There's a lot there, but we know that. I mean, our technology in general is more sophisticated. So if we think that, they just stopped there, then we're severely mistaken. So one of the other things that I'm seeing emerge is the military. And again, there's parts and there's people that are great, in the military, of course, and there's parts that are not. And you're talking about, more that kind of like black budget type of aspect of the military, but putting themselves on par with some of these beings, and also stepping in front of the contactees. I mean, why have contactees been so? Even I saw Whitley's interview. You directed me. Whitley can't get published. Are you kidding me? Like, his book was so groundbreaking. His work was incredibly groundbreaking. As a 19-year-old, I picked up that book and I went, oh, this is similar to what I see, like who
Mhm.
knows about this, right? And then, shortly after I met Bud Hopkins. The point is that, why are the contactees continually being sidestepped and 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 not being treated with a level of respect
Mhm.
and maturity that is in alignment to what they're continually saying that their narrative is. To me, what it's they're stepping in front of it. And last thing I'll say on this one piece is, when I met Dr. Edgar Mitchell, I shared with him my story. I think I mentioned this last time, and I said to him, I said, I don't understand, what is this all about? Like in terms of why the military tracks people. And again, he told me, he said, well, the military's had that technology for a very, very long time. And I was referring to like, the late 1970s, early 80s. And he was indicating that they had it, for like many, many years, meaning the tracking capacity of
Mhm.
people that had contact and tracking ships and whatnot. But he said once it reaches a critical point of awareness, that's when they'll step in and they'll do something about it. So, my sense is part of, this disclosure stuff is is the military stepping ahead of people to have their own contact and people to have their own connection. And, that's anything but what we know that this is about in
Mhm.
my in
I
many,
agree.
many genuine contactees. And if you look at MK Ultra, the millet, that all those, by the way, it wasn't just you know, aspects of the military. It was university. It was hospitals. It was doctors. It was, even pharmaceutical. So, you have all of this, like all these players in collaboration with one another, treating their fellow human beings as if, they're experiments to be
Mhm.
experimented on. That is anything but what an evolving civilization would be doing with one another, you
Mhm.
know, um, and 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 this is where the playbook really gets really screwed up, right?
Mm.
It's like,
Very convoluted and very it's abominable when you think about it, but yeah, yeah. Again,
it
I just
is.
wanna insert that you please, please, please go and read, Susan's article, which she's referencing here, The Experimental Industrial Complex, because you did such a brilliant job at weaving the relevancy of these MK Ultra experiments of the '70s and even the admission of it, the breadth and scope of the apparatus, and how that supports our having the right to question the legitimacy of what's coming out of this possibly same apparatus now. You know, their government's not right just or truthful just part of the time. They, you know what I'm saying? So
Right.
yeah.
Can just make another insertion point. And also, people that I've had contact will talk about experiments that have been done on them, or they felt like they were experiments. And I've also done hypnosis with people, and it's some people would reveal like at face value they didn't remember agreeing to this, and then under hypnosis they just remember like, wow, this is part of my agreement. I just forgot, that being here, some of this was to take place. But for other people, it wasn't that case. They would say, this felt terrible. Like I know in Whitley's situation, this
Mhm.
was an attack, so to speak. He may use different words. I'm not him, but similar to that he didn't feel like maybe there was an agreement on some level in certain, you know. I don't want to say all experiments, but certain things that happened to him. But here's the part of this human maturity piece. I think we're seeing something that people will do whatever they want to do to someone else, whether it's a private group, government funded, whatever, whatever, whatever. Um,
Mhm.
it is up to each human being to say no. It's up to each human being if they don't agree with something to know better enough to say no.
To know
And I
better.
think that if there's a common thread here with why awareness is important and why human sovereignty is important, then it's the capacity to have that awareness and then to say no.
Mhm.
Um, and whether it's someone who is having an experience with an interdimensional being or an ET. I mean, if I can share this one thing, I remember an experience I had with an interdimensional being when I was in my early 30s, and I was asked permission. Do you want to see what we look like? And I said yes, and then I got scared and I said no. And then I stopped reading it. So it's
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
but do you think I could have said that when I was 5 or 9, or, like, even when I was, taken by that man in the car, and asked about my contact, that was a military person. You get older, you get wiser, but you also, as a planet, we get wiser. And that capacity to have that awareness, I'm going to repeat that, is critical. And I think that's what we're
Right.
trying to do here, is to raise that awareness. But if something doesn't feel right, to say no.
Just say no. That's right. Well, here's the rub, though, Susan. And this again goes back to this idea of human psychology and how it's been so altered or interfered with, not even having the inclination to say no, not having the inclination or the desire to discern, to be aware. There's a measure of laziness that's also been seated, I think, in way too many people. We want things handed to us, and we're just going to trust the system that my parents trusted and my grandparents trusted, and it just doesn't go any farther than that. So now we're going down a rabbit hole of a dilemma that I don't know can be undone for so many. I have hope, but I don't know. I just don't know. And I think that the factions that are behind whatever are well aware of that. Hence the reason why they can get away with so much and still are.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And then, like we saw with lockdowns, and then when the pressure comes from family and friends and colleagues, people that you're close to, that forces others, that social, and they did it. I mean, let's be totally honest, they did it masterfully with the whole UFO topic for
Mhm.
ages. I mean,
Mhm.
I remember I was in the process of thinking to go get my PhD, a while ago, and I and it was at a very good Ivy League school, and I tapped the glass a little bit, to see, is this something that I could do? Because I just didn't want to do like standard research on emotional intelligence. I wanted to really go deeper into more consciousness. And
Mhm.
I was told, you don't touch that, you'll lose your credibility.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
don't touch that. So, you know,
Hmm.
they masterfully did that with the UFO topic for ages.
Oh, absolutely.
You couldn't talk about it, right? I mean, and
That's
I would
still
bring
happening. That's still happening, Susan, for
it,
sure. I mean, that's part of the reason
isn't
why
it?
it's alleged that Grusch had to go to get protection because of the bullying, which was, I think, well beyond the verbal bullying, as Keene and Blumenthal alluded to, but true harassment and maybe threats. So
Yeah.
someone was saying to him, "You don't touch it." If that's the way it went down. Again, we don't
You
know.
you don't know, but I'll tell you something. The people that have experienced the absolute greatest harassment and the absolute greatest injustice are people that have legitimately had contact,
Contact. I know.
that
Yeah.
that have tried to live their life in truth. And I use the word coherency because you don't want to walk around as a split human being, or have to hide
Right.
many pieces and parts of yourself, because that's not healthy to do that. um, so these people, myself and millions of others, have had to watch this um, silliness
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
immaturity for years. So when I bless those who are advocates in supporting this form of disclosure, when they give such reverence to someone like that, you say to yourself, where were you? Where have you been for all of
Right.
these other people that have had our lives? We've had to do so many. I mean, we've had to be master alchemists with
Mhm.
with how we move about our lives, because you don't fit into a standard
No.
box here. There's no pension. There's no, I mean, it's not going to happen. And, so, we've had to make a lot of these adjustments. And again, it's not a criticism. And I want to say this too, in the realm of everything as a whole, I'm sure this is a good thing because this tapped the glass, right? And in the tapping of the glass, you get to see what starts to what part starts to crack, and then what happens as that cracking is taking place. And I think we're seeing that. I think we're seeing that, and hopefully, it is my hope and my intention that that's going to prompt greater conversations to take place,
Right.
deeper conversations to take place, and not a repeat of what I call these dominant narratives, and not a repeat of that. And if that continues forward in the UFO community, then why
We're
are
not
you?
making any headway. We're just not
Why
making any headway. Yeah.
it makes no sense.
Yes. I didn't mean to cut you off, but you're right. I agree that this is, there again, you made a good point when you said that because these little drips come and seem to have such an emphatic and profound effect on those that are so close. This is their lifeblood, whether you're a researcher, or whatever in the community, that you're eating it up so much. But you're pacified with it. And I won't mention any names, but there are some people, I was a contact in the desert. I know, some of them were just, oh my God, can you believe this is and it justifiably so. Look, we're starved for anything that we can get us closer. I can empathize with that as well, but immediately my radar went up. Immediately, okay, what's going on now? And there were some conversations I had offline with you about some of the pieces I put together in terms of of it coming out during contact in the desert. So there's something going on here in terms of a plan. But you also bring up a really good point, Susan, that sometimes the best laid plans can take on a life of their own and actually end up exactly where they're meant to, and do exactly what they need to by tapping that glass.
Yeah.
Whoever is developing the narrative, won't be able to take credit for that. It'll be universe, because I say universe is still in charge.
Universe is masterfully Aikidoing things. I mean, it really is. And I think, even for myself, like you just a lot of us just pay attention to our intuition. We just pay attention to those impulses and to the call. You hear the call to do XYZ, so you do XYZ. And it doesn't come from an external ego thing. It comes from a force of energy that's moving, that's being asked to be addressed.
Yeah.
And so, that's the great Aikido of listening to spirit.
Absolutely. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. It's a great place to end before we go next door. Susan, this is great stuff. Let's go next door. I want to dig in a little deeper on the experimental industrial complex, and where you went so bravely in terms of looking at MK Ultra. I think, like you said before we went on the air, this is something that we need to talk about and understand how us humans, many of us, have been an experiment, and still are, perhaps in a more sophisticated way, but an experiment nonetheless. Let's talk about it. Let's have that conversation. But in the meantime, I want to remind people, please go to both Higher Journeys. Susan was kind enough to let me link her second article, What Are UFO Disclosure Gatekeepers Acclimating the Public To, but it will lead you back to her Substack. And I'm going to have a link to both articles directly on her Substack as well. Good stuff. Go sign up, subscribe to Susan's Substack. Tell me the name of it again. It's the name.
IET Evolve at substack.com. And I had a little fun on 4th of July and created something fun that will be ready for the time. I just wanted to do it to have fun. It's called IamAFreeHuman.com. And there's some fun stuff on there. And it was created in the sense of this feeling of liberty and justice, and proclaiming our beautiful human sovereignty that we have. So IamAFreeHuman.com to go to that.
Is that actually a domain that you created?
Yeah.
Oh my
God.
I love it.
I couldn't believe it was available. I'm like,
I am afraid. Wow, there you
So it's
go.
it's fun. It's a fun site because like some of this stuff is heavy and it's
Yes, we
so
need
I'll
to
just
keep
share
the
that. You
yeah.
take a peek at that.
I love it. That's great. So yet another link we'll have for you. I am a freehuman.com. And it is true. Thank you, Susan, my dear. As always, the
Thank you.
conversations just get more profound and more important than ever. So we appreciate you coming and joining us again. Okay, don't go away. Come with us, journeyers. Will you please? Will you please support Higher Journeys on Patreon and get some good stuff while you're there. So we're gonna go take it a bit deeper, as deep as we can. Let's just leave it at that. All right. Okay. Love you much. We'll talk to you soon. Take care. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to watch what's next, plus more to explore. And don't forget to subscribe to Higher Journeys.